Marlene counted the motorcycles through her shop window. 1, 10, 50, 97. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped her keys. This many bikers didn't show up to say thank you. Upstairs, her daughter was crying, struggling to breathe, inhaler almost empty. Outside, police sirens screamed closer. And at the front of it all stood one man, scarred silent, holding an envelope and a photograph of someone Marlene buried 35 years ago. A man she was told died alone. Before you decide whether this was a miracle or a threat, you need to know what happened the night before. Because Marlene almost didn't open the door. Before you decide what this story is about, stay with me. This isn't a story about bikers, or money, or luck. It's about what happens when a good person keeps choosing decency in a world that keeps testing it. Marlene didn't help because she expected anything back. She helped because she didn't know how to be someone who walked away. And the men who showed up at her door weren't there for gratitude. They were there because a debt had been waiting for 35 years. This story moves slowly for a reason. Because the truth doesn't shout. It waits. If you've ever been one step from losing everything and still tried to do the right thing, this story is for you. Stay until the end, not for the surprise, but for what it proves. And if you believe stories like this still matter, quietly subscribe now. Marlene noticed the silence first. Not the kind that comes late at night when a neighborhood settles, but the kind that feels wrong, like the world is holding its breath. She stood behind the counter of her small cobbler shop, a single key clenched in her hand, listening to nothing at all. Then the sound came back. A low rumble rolled through the street, deep and steady, vibrating the glass before it reached her ears. Another joined it. Then another. The noise grew layer by layer until the air itself seemed to hum. Marlene moved toward the window, her steps slow, cautious, as if she were approaching something alive. Motorcycles. They were everywhere. They lined the curb in long, perfect rows, chrome catching the early light, engines idling in eerie synchronization. More kept arriving, turning the corner two at a time, slipping neatly into place. Marlene's throat tightened as she counted without meaning to. 10. 20. 40. The number climbed until it stopped making sense. 97 motorcycles filled the street outside her shop, blocking both ends as if no one was meant to pass through. Her hand started to shake. The key slipped from her fingers and hit the counter with a sharp, echoing clink that sounded far too loud in the quiet shop. Upstairs, her daughter screamed. "Mom." The fear in her voice cut straight through Marlene's chest. She could hear the wheeze in her breathing, the uneven pull of air that meant panic was already setting in. The breathing machine stuttered, working harder than it should have. Marlene knew what that sound meant. The inhaler was nearly empty. There was no room left for mistakes. Outside, doors slammed. Someone shouted from across the street. Metal rattled as a security gate was pulled down in a hurry. Phones came out. Curtains twitched. Fear spread faster than the motorcycles had arrived. And still, the bikers did nothing. They sat mounted and motionless, faces unreadable, eyes hidden behind dark lenses and deep lines. The engines continued their low, steady growl, a sound that pressed into Marlene's ribs and made it hard to breathe. She had never seen anything like it. This wasn't chaos. This was order. Then one man swung his leg off his bike. He was tall, broad, his movements deliberate and slow. Every step toward her door felt heavier than the last. He raised his hands as he walked, palms open, not rushing, not hesitating. He stopped just inches from the glass. In his left hand was an envelope. In his right, a photograph. Marlene's eyes locked onto it. She couldn't see the details, not yet, but her body reacted all the same. Her stomach dropped, a cold, familiar ache spreading through her chest. That photograph carried weight. It carried time. It carried something she had learned to live without. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Orders were shouted. Someone banged on her door from the neighboring shop, begging her not to open it. Her daughter cried again upstairs, her voice thin and scared. Marlene pressed her back against the counter, heart racing. Yesterday, she had been worried about rent, about groceries, about surviving 3 more days. Now 97 bikers stood outside her shop, and one of them was holding a piece of her past in his hands. She didn't know why they were there. She didn't know what they wanted. She only knew that whatever had begun with a small act of kindness was no longer small, and it was waiting for her to answer. If you believe kindness shouldn't come with fear, stay with me. 21 hours earlier, the street outside Marlene's shop looked ordinary. Too ordinary for how heavy her chest felt as she sat alone behind the counter, staring at a piece of paper she already knew by heart. Final notice. The words were printed in bold red letters, taped crookedly to the side of her workbench like a warning she couldn't escape. 3 days. 72 hours. That was all she had left before the locks were changed, and a sheriff escorted her and her daughter out of the only place that had ever truly been home. Marlene folded the notice carefully, as if being gentle with it might somehow make it gentler with her. She slid it into the drawer beneath the counter and opened her phone again, even though she already knew what she would see. $197.32. The number hadn't changed all day. It hadn't changed the day before that either. She did the math again, the same hopeless calculation she'd been running in her head for weeks. Rent she couldn't pay. Utilities already past due. A growing list of final warnings that no longer scared her because fear had turned into something quieter and heavier. Upstairs, the soft mechanical hum of a breathing machine filled the air. Her daughter's asthma had been bad since she was little, but the last few weeks had been worse. Stress made it worse. Cold air made it worse. Running out of medication made it dangerous. Marlene paused her work and listened carefully, counting breaths the way only a parent learns to do. In, out, in, out. A hitch. A cough. She set her tools down and stood, pressing her palm flat against the workbench for balance before heading toward the stairs. Halfway up, she stopped. The machine steadied. The coughing eased. Her daughter murmured something in her sleep. Marlene exhaled slowly and leaned against the wall, eyes closed. She went back downstairs and returned to her work like she always did, with quiet determination and no one watching. The shop smelled of leather and polish, the same smell it had carried for decades. The same smell her father had brought home on his clothes when she was a child, long before life became about deadlines and notices and running out of time. Her hands moved automatically, stitching a worn sole back into place. She didn't need to look. Muscle memory guided her fingers, the rhythm steady and precise. Her father used to say you could tell everything about a person by how they fixed what was broken. Whether they rushed. Whether they cut corners. Whether they cared about the parts no one would ever see. He had taught her this trade when she was still small enough to stand on a crate beside him. He believed in doing things right, even when no one was paying attention. Especially then. A framed photograph hung on the wall behind her workbench. She didn't look at it often, but she knew it was there. A younger man with strong hands and tired eyes, smiling like he believed the world could be decent if people tried hard enough. Sometimes she wondered if that belief had gotten him killed. People in the neighborhood liked to remind her that times had changed. That shops like hers didn't belong anymore. That leather repair was a dying trade. New owners had moved in, businesses with bright signs and higher prices, places that didn't know her name and didn't want to. She felt their eyes on her when she opened the shop each morning, felt the quiet judgment when she closed late. Pressure came from everywhere, but it never shouted. It whispered. It whispered when customers asked for discounts. When neighbors suggested she look for something else. When landlords raised rents without apology. When her daughter asked, gently, if they were going to be okay. Marlene never answered that question directly. She kept working. The clock ticked louder than usual that night. Each second felt deliberate, measured, moving her closer to something she couldn't see but could feel approaching. She glanced again at the drawer where the eviction notice lay hidden, then at her phone, then toward the stairs. Her gaze drifted back to the photograph on the wall. There was something about it she couldn't explain, a pull she felt even when she tried not to think about the past. About the parts of her father's life she never fully understood. About the things he never talked about, the places he went, the people he knew. She had been told he died alone. That was the official story. An accident. Clean. Simple. Final. And yet sometimes, late at night, she wondered why the explanation had never quite fit. Why there were gaps where answers should have been. Why certain names were never spoken again. She shook the thought away and focused on the stitch in front of her. Worrying about the past wouldn't pay rent. It wouldn't refill an inhaler. It wouldn't stop the clock. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere down the block, laughter spilled out of a new restaurant she couldn't afford to eat at. Life moved on around her, indifferent to her countdown. Marlene tied off the thread and held the repaired shoe up to the light. Clean work. Honest work. The kind her father would have approved of. She allowed herself a small nod of satisfaction before placing it gently beside the others. Exhaustion settled into her bones, but she didn't stop. Stopping meant thinking, and thinking led to panic. So she kept going, one stitch at a time, holding on to the quiet dignity of doing her job well when everything else felt like it was slipping away. She had no idea that before the night was over, someone would walk through her door carrying a piece of her past she hadn't seen in decades. She didn't know that the photograph on her wall would soon have an answer standing in front of it. All she knew was that she was one bill away from losing everything, and she was still here, still working, still holding the line. If you've ever been one bill away from losing everything, hit like, you're not invisible. The sound reached Marlene before the sight did. A low rumble crept through the floorboards, so faint at first she thought it might be thunder rolling in from the bay. It grew steadier, heavier, until the windows began to hum in sympathy. Her hands paused mid-stitch. She listened, breath held, recognizing the sound even though she hadn't heard it this close in years. Motorcycles. She stood slowly and moved toward the front of the shop, careful to stay in the shadows. Outside, 5 bikes rolled to a stop in front of her door, their headlights briefly washing the brick wall in white before clicking off one by one. Silence followed, thick and immediate. 5 men dismounted. They were large, broad-shouldered, wrapped in leather darkened by miles of road. Patches covered their vests, worn soft with age and use. Marlene felt her stomach tighten. Every instinct she had told her to turn off the lights, lock the door, pretend she wasn't there. It was after midnight. She was alone. Her daughter slept upstairs. Nothing good ever started like this. One of the men noticed her silhouette in the window. He raised both hands slowly, palms open, a gesture so deliberate it stopped her mid-step. The others followed, copying the motion without being told. No one spoke. They waited. Against her better judgment, Marlene unlocked the door and cracked it open just enough to speak. "We're closed," she said, keeping her voice steady. The oldest of the group stepped forward. His hair was silver at the temples, his face marked by deep lines that spoke of wind, sun, and long roads. When he spoke, his voice was rough but careful, like he understood how threatening this looked. "Ma'am, we know," he said. "And we're sorry to bother you this late." He gestured back toward the bikes. "We're in trouble." That was not reassuring. Before Marlene could respond, another man shifted beside him. Younger, thick arms, scars across his knuckles. His eyes were red. Not angry. Wet. Marlene noticed then that all 5 men looked wrong somehow. Tired beyond exhaustion. Not dangerous. Worn down. The older man continued. "We were riding back from a memorial. Lost a brother last week. We've got another ride at dawn. Club rules say we don't ride without our boots in order." He reached down and lifted one heavy riding boot, the sole torn nearly in half, leather split and scraped raw. The others followed, holding theirs up like proof. The damage was bad. Structural. Not something that could be glued and rushed. Marlene's trained. I assessed the work automatically. Restitching. Reinforcement. New soles. Hours of labor. By dawn? She shook her head. That's not possible, she said. Not tonight. The men exchanged looks. The younger one swallowed hard. We figured, he said quietly. The older man reached into his pocket and pulled out a few crumpled bills, flattening them against his thigh. We've got $40 between us, he admitted. We know it's not enough. We've called every shop we could find. You're the only light on. Marlene felt suspicion harden in her chest. 5 bikers. Midnight. No money. An impossible deadline. Every sensible part of her screamed no. She thought of the eviction notice. Of the $197 in her account. Of her daughter upstairs. She thought of how many times she had given discounts she couldn't afford. How many times kindness had cost her. I can't, she said, firmer now. This is hours of work. Silence settled between them. Then the oldest man did something she didn't expect. He took off his helmet and held it against his chest, like he was standing at a graveside. Our brother was buried yesterday, he said. Cancer. 2 years of fighting. Tomorrow's ride is the last thing we can do for him. He taught us about respect. About showing up right. His voice broke on the last word. Marlene felt something shift. Not trust. Not yet. Recognition. Her gaze drifted past them, back into her shop, to the workbench worn smooth by decades of hands. To the tools hanging exactly where her father had placed them long before she owned the space. She heard his voice in her head, clear as if he were standing beside her. If someone needs something fixed, and you know how to fix it, you don't walk away. She looked back at the boots. At the careful way they were being held. At the way these men waited without pushing, without demanding. By dawn, she said quietly. The older man nodded. By dawn. She took a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Bring them in, she said. Relief hit them all at once. One man closed his eyes. Another let out a shaky laugh that sounded more like a sob. The oldest man met her eyes, something like disbelief flickering there. Ma'am, he started. She held up a hand. I didn't say anything about payment, she said. I said bring them in. They moved quickly then, careful not to crowd her, laying the boots out on her workbench like something fragile. Marlene ran her fingers over the torn leather, the broken seams, already planning the repairs. This is my trade, she said, more to herself than to them. My father taught me. At the mention of her father, the room changed. The oldest man froze. His eyes flicked to the framed photograph on the wall behind her. His face went pale. The younger man whispered something Marlene couldn't hear. She noticed the way they looked at her now, not with desperation, but with something deeper. Something like recognition. What's your name? The older man asked. Marlene, she said. Marlene Washington. The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with words no one spoke. Marlene didn't see it yet. She only felt the air shift around her, the sense that she had just stepped into something much bigger than a pair of broken boots. And she still hadn't asked the question that lingered between them all. Why her? Marlene didn't announce her decision. She simply reached for her tools. The men stood quietly as she cleared space on the workbench, moving with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this thousands of times before. One by one, she lined the boots under the lamp, turning each slowly, pressing her thumb into torn leather, testing weak seams. The damage was worse up close. Road wear, stress fractures, soles nearly separating from years of use. This wasn't cosmetic. This was structural. This is going to take hours, she said, finally. That's okay, the oldest man replied. We'll wait. She glanced at the clock without meaning to. Time stared back at her, unbothered. Dawn was coming whether she was ready or not. Marlene threaded her needle, the familiar motion steadying her hands. The first puncture through leather made a soft, practiced sound, one that carried more comfort than any promise. As she worked, the shop filled with quiet, broken only by the scrape of tools and the ticking clock overhead. Upstairs, her daughter shifted in her sleep. Marlene paused, listening, then continued. Hours passed like that. The men sat against the wall, some on overturned crates, others on folding chairs. They spoke in low voices at first, then not at all, watching her work as if afraid to interrupt something sacred. One of them winced each time the needle pierced the thick leather, as if feeling it himself. "You're fast," one finally said. "I'm careful," Marlene replied. "There's a difference." Her father's voice echoed in her mind, uninvited but welcome. "Don't rush what matters. If you cut corners, they'll show when it counts." She adjusted the lamp and reinforced a seam that wouldn't be visible once the boot was worn, but would hold under strain. She glanced at the clock again. The oldest man noticed. "You don't have to keep going," he said quietly. "We know this is a lot." Marlene didn't look up. "If I stop now, it's unfinished," she said. "And unfinished work fails when it's needed most." She didn't say what else she was thinking. That stopping meant going upstairs and staring at the ceiling until morning. That stopping meant counting dollars she didn't have and breaths she couldn't control. That stopping meant choosing survival over who she believed she was. The clock ticked on. Sometime after 2, the younger man with scarred knuckles stood and walked closer. He stared at the framed photograph on the wall behind her workbench, his jaw tightening. His eyes shone, but he said nothing. Just nodded once, to himself, and returned to his seat. Marlene noticed but didn't ask. By 3, her hands ached. By 4, her shoulders burned. She rolled them once, then went back to work. Leather dust clung to her fingers. Waxed thread pulled tight under her calloused grip. Each stitch locked another piece of the boot back into place, restoring something meant to carry weight. The oldest man broke the silence again. "You didn't ask for payment." Marlene smiled faintly. "You already told me you didn't have it. That doesn't mean you should work for nothing." She paused then, needle held mid-air. "My father used to say something," she said. "He said when someone's hurting, you don't treat it like a transaction. You treat it like family." The words settled into the room. "That's what family does," she added quietly. Something passed between the men. A look. A breath held too long. The oldest man opened his mouth, then closed it again. He rubbed his hands together, restless. There was something he wanted to say. Something he was choosing not to. Withheld truth pressed against the air, heavy and unspoken. Marlene finished the 4th pair just before dawn, holding each boot up to the light, testing the seams, flexing the soles. Solid. Strong. Built to last. She reached for the last boot, Marcus's, though she didn't yet know his name, and worked slower now, exhaustion forcing care. When she tied off the final stitch, she exhaled deeply and leaned back, eyes closed for just a moment. "It's done," she said. The men stood as one. The oldest man stepped forward and tried again to press the money into her hand. She gently pushed it back. "Keep it," she said. "You'll need it more than I will." That wasn't true. Not practically. But it was true where it mattered. The man's hands trembled. "You shouldn't have done this." Marlene met his gaze. "I know." Upstairs, her daughter coughed softly, then settled. The clock ticked toward dawn. The men gathered their boots, reverent now, careful in a way that had nothing to do with fear. The younger man with the scars stopped beside her workbench and spoke for the first time. "He'd be proud," he said. "Who?" Marlene asked. The man swallowed, emotion flickering across his face before he turned away without answering. The oldest man lingered at the door. He pulled a folded envelope from his pocket and placed it on the counter. "Don't open this until morning," he said. Marlene frowned. "What is it?" "A promise," he replied. "Just wait." She nodded, too tired to argue. As they left, the engines started one by one, rolling away into the thinning night. Marlene locked the door behind them and leaned against it, her legs finally giving in. She picked up the envelope, turned it over once, then set it down unopened. She went upstairs, checked on her daughter, and collapsed onto her bed fully clothed. She had chosen values over survival. She had chosen family over fear. And she had no idea what that choice was about to cost, or return. If you believe helping people shouldn't require permission, comment, "Kindness matters." Marlene didn't sleep. She lay on her bed fully clothed, the thin blanket pulled up to her chest, listening to the familiar sounds of the building settling around her. Pipes clicked. A radiator hissed. Somewhere outside, a car passed and disappeared. Morning was coming whether she welcomed it or not. On the nightstand beside her sat the envelope. It was plain. No name. No writing. Just folded once, edges worn like it had been carried for a long time before being placed in her hand. She had set it there deliberately, as if distance alone could keep it from calling to her. She stared at the ceiling and replayed the moment again and again. The way the oldest biker's voice had changed when he handed it to her. Not demanding. Not dramatic. Almost careful. "Don't open it until morning." She had asked why. He had shaken his head, just once. "Because tonight isn't the right time." That answer didn't explain anything. It only deepened the ache of not knowing. Marlene turned onto her side and reached out, stopping just short of touching the envelope. Every instinct told her to open it. Whatever was inside might be money. Or a threat. Or nothing at all. It might answer questions she hadn't yet found the courage to ask. It might also make everything worse. Upstairs, her daughter's breathing machine hummed steadily. That sound anchored her. As long as it continued, there was something she could still protect. Something that mattered more than curiosity. She pulled her hand back. Promises mattered to Marlene. They always had. Her father had taught her that too. A promise wasn't something you bent because you were tired or scared. It was a line you didn't cross, even when no one was watching. Especially then. She closed her eyes and let exhaustion take over in fragments, drifting in and out of shallow sleep. Each time she woke, the envelope was still there. Silent. Patient. When the alarm finally sounded, it felt too loud, too sudden. Morning light filtered weakly through the curtains. Her body ached in places she hadn't felt in years. Hands stiff. Back tight. The price of choosing to work through the night. She sat up slowly and reached for the envelope again. Not yet. Downstairs, the shop waited. Responsibility waited. Rent waited. The world hadn't paused just because she had made a choice. She tucked the envelope into the drawer beneath the counter, the same drawer where the eviction notice lay hidden. Two unknowns sitting side by side, each carrying a different kind of weight. When she unlocked the shop door and flipped the sign, the street looked normal. Too normal. Neighbors opened their stores. Someone swept a sidewalk. A woman walked past with a coffee in her hand. No motorcycles. No leather. No scars or secrets. For a moment, Marlene wondered if she had imagined the night entirely. Then her phone rang. She answered questions about pricing. About repairs. About timelines. She nodded, smiled, wrote things down. Muscle memory took over again, filling the space where sleep should have been. But the envelope stayed with her, even unseen. Every time she passed the drawer, she felt it. Every time the bell over the door rang, her pulse jumped. She half expected the men to return, to explain themselves, to take back whatever they had left behind. They didn't. Time stretched. Customers came and went. Small transactions. Small talk. Small moments that pretended life was manageable. At mid-morning, she stepped into the back room and leaned against the wall, pressing her fingers into her temples. Her daughter would wake soon. The inhaler was still almost empty. The math hadn't changed. She thought again of the photograph she had seen on the wall behind her workbench the night before. Of the way the bikers had looked at it. At her. At the name Washington. There was history there. She could feel it. A story that didn't belong to her yet, but was circling closer. Her phone buzzed with a message from the landlord's office, polite and cold, reminding her of the deadline she already knew too well. Tomorrow at noon. Tomorrow. The word echoed. She walked back to the counter and opened the drawer just enough to see the corner of the envelope. Her fingers hovered. She could open it now. No one would stop her. No one would know. But she remembered the man's eyes when he'd asked her to wait. The respect there. The restraint. Whatever was inside wasn't meant for a tired woman in the middle of the night. It was meant for daylight. For witnesses. For truth. She closed the drawer. Marlene had survived her life by making careful choices when panic would have been easier. This was just another one. She kept her promise. And that changed everything. The first motorcycle arrived without warning. Marlene barely noticed it at first, too focused on the steady rhythm of her work, on keeping her hands moving so her mind wouldn't wander back to the envelope hidden in the drawer. The engine idled somewhere outside, low and patient, then stayed that way longer than it should have. She glanced up. The bike sat across the street, rider still mounted, helmet on, not moving. Not shopping. Not leaving. A second motorcycle rolled in moments later and took its place beside the first. Then a third. Marlene's chest tightened. She stepped closer to the window, careful not to be seen too clearly, and watched as more bikes appeared at the far end of the block. 2 at a time. Then 3. They parked with precision, spacing exact, engine settling into the same steady rumble. The sound built slowly, layering over itself until it pressed against her ribs. That same vibration from the night before. Familiar now. Heavier. Mrs. Chun from the laundromat next door appeared in her doorway, eyes wide. "Marlene," she hissed, panic sharp in her voice. "You seeing this?" "I see it," Marlene said, though her voice barely sounded like her own. 5 motorcycles became 10. 10 became 20. People stepped out of shops, phones already raised. Someone pulled down a security gate. Another locked a door from the inside. Fear moved faster than reason, filling the spaces between the engines and the silence. The bikes kept coming. 30. 40. Marlene found herself counting under her breath, the numbers slipping out without permission. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. This was organized. The street was filling edge to edge, blocked completely now. No cars could pass. No one could leave. Sirens wailed in the distance. Mrs. Chun's hand trembled as she dialed. "I'm calling the police," she whispered. "This isn't normal. This is dangerous." Marlene didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the riders. They weren't shouting. They weren't revving their engines aggressively. They weren't threatening anyone. They were waiting. The number climbed past what her mind could easily hold. 50. 60. 70. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. 97. The entire street fell silent except for the synchronized rumble of nearly 100 engines idling in perfect control. The sound wasn't chaotic. It was disciplined. It carried weight, intention. Police cars screeched to a stop at the far end of the block, unable to get any closer. Officers spilled out, hands on weapons, voices raised, commands overlapping and ineffective against the wall of sound and steel. "Get back from the windows," someone shouted. "Marlene, don't open that door." Mrs. Chun cried, gripping her arm. Upstairs, Marlene heard her daughter's voice, thin and scared. "Mom." Marlene swallowed hard. Then one man dismounted. The same man from the night before. He moved slowly, deliberately, raising his hands before anyone could tell him to. Behind him, 96 riders remained mounted, perfectly still. Not one followed. Not one broke formation. The street seemed to hold its breath. He walked toward Marlene's shop as police shouted orders from behind barricaded doors and car hoods. He didn't look back. He didn't acknowledge them at all. His focus never left the shop window. In his left hand was an envelope. In his right was a photograph. Marlene's knees weakened. She recognized it instantly now. Even from this distance. Even through the glass. Her father. Mrs. Chun gasped. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Marlene, don't. Please." The police shouted again, louder this time, urgency creeping into their voices. Hands tightened around weapons. The situation teetered on the edge of something terrible. The man stopped at the door. He didn't touch it. He didn't knock. He just stood there, holding the photograph up so Marlene could see it clearly, tears cutting clean lines through the grime on his face. His lips moved silently. "Please." It wasn't a threat. It was a plea. Marlene's hand moved to the lock before her mind caught up. Every instinct screamed danger. Every memory of the night before whispered something else. She unlocked the door. The sound was sharp in the silence. The police shouted a final warning. Mrs. Chun cried out. Someone screamed for her to stop. Marlene opened the door and stepped back. The man entered quickly, slipping inside before anyone could stop him. She locked the door behind him, shutting out the chaos, the sirens, the fear. Inside the shop, the engine noise dulled, distant now, like thunder heard from far away. "You shouldn't have done that," the man said quietly. "They don't understand." "Then explain it," Marlene replied, her voice shaking. "Explain why 97 bikers just shut down my street." He set the photograph on the counter between them. "My name is Marcus," he said. "And 35 years ago, your father saved my life." Outside, the shouting continued. Inside, the world narrowed to a single image. And then something happened that no one outside could have predicted. Without a signal. Without a word. 97 engines cut at once. The sudden silence was overwhelming. And then, as one, every biker dismounted. They knelt. Helmets came off. Heads bowed. Leather and steel lowered to the pavement in perfect unison, not in aggression, not in defiance, but in respect. The street froze. Police officers lowered their weapons, confusion washing over their faces. Neighbors stopped filming. Mrs. Chun's phone slipped from her hand. Terror gave way to disbelief. Whatever this was, it wasn't what anyone had feared. It was something else entirely. And Marlene stood behind her counter, staring at her father's face on the photograph, realizing that the truth she had waited her whole life for had finally come home. But the reason why was still waiting to be told. Marlene stared at the photograph on the counter as if it might disappear if she blinked. Her father looked younger than she remembered. Not the tired man she'd watched leave for work each morning, shoulders already carrying the weight of responsibility, but someone alive in a way she had almost forgotten. He was smiling, standing beside another man on a motorcycle, one arm slung casually over a shoulder. The smile wasn't posed. It was earned. Marcus stood across from her, hands resting on the counter's edge, knuckles white. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the world waited. Sirens still echoed faintly. 97 men knelt in silence. "You were told he died alone," Marcus said finally, his voice low and careful. "That it was a single-vehicle accident." Marlene nodded. The words felt heavy in her mouth. That's what the report said. Marcus closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. It wasn't true. The room seemed to tilt. Marlene gripped the counter to stay upright. January 14th, Marcus continued. Route 66. Late at night. We were riding back from a chapter meeting. 10 of us. A semi crossed the line. Driver had been awake too long. Fell asleep at the wheel. Marlene's breath caught. He hit us head-on, Marcus said. 3 bikes went down immediately. Gas everywhere. Fire waiting for a spark. He swallowed hard and looked down at the photograph. I was pinned. Bike on my leg. Fuel pooling around me. I knew I wasn't getting out on my own. Marlene shook her head slowly. The report. The report was written to protect us, Marcus said, the words blunt and unforgiving. Insurance companies would have destroyed the club. Lawsuits. Criminal charges. Everything. So leadership made a choice. The same word she had used the night before. They called it a solo crash, he said. Said your father lost control. Rider error. Clean. Simple. No one asks questions. Marlene felt something tear open inside her chest. My mother tried, she whispered. She called. She wrote letters. No one would talk to her. Marcus nodded. We were told not to. Silence stretched, thick with regret. Your father didn't hesitate, Marcus said. He jumped off his bike while it was still moving. Ran straight into the fire. Pulled me out first. Dragged me clear. Marlene closed her eyes. She could see it. Her father's hands. Strong. Certain. The way he always fixed things by moving toward the problem, never away. There was another man, Marcus continued. Pinned worse than I was. Tomas. Bike fully on him. Your father went back. You're saying, Marlene's voice broke. He went back. He lifted a burning motorcycle off another man, Marcus said, tears finally spilling free. By himself. Got him clear. 5 seconds later, the fuel ignited. The explosion. Marcus couldn't finish. Marlene slid down against the counter, knees buckling. The truth hit her all at once, not as a story but as weight. 35 years of not knowing. 35 years of quiet shame attached to a lie she had never questioned because she had trusted the paper that told it. He didn't die alone, she said, the words hollow and aching. He died saving people. Yes, Marcus said. And then we buried that truth to save ourselves. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the envelope she had been told not to open. He placed it beside the photograph, then reached again, this time producing a folded document, yellowed with age. This is the original incident report, he said. The one that never made it to your family. Witness statements. Names. Everything. Marlene didn't touch it yet. Her gaze drifted instead to the boots she had repaired the night before, still sitting neatly by the wall. The same hands that had stitched torn leather back into place had belonged to the man who ran into fire without hesitation. Her father had always fixed what was broken. Those boots, Marcus said quietly, following her gaze. The ones you repaired for free. That's why they mattered so much to us. Not just because of the ride. Because when you worked through the night knowing you couldn't afford it, you proved something. What? Marlene asked. That you're his daughter, Marcus said simply. Not by blood. By choice. The room felt reverent now, like a place of worship built out of truth instead of stone. The lie stole everything from us, Marlene said. From my mother. From me. Marcus nodded. And it stole something from us too. We lost the right to say his name out loud. He gestured toward the door, toward the kneeling men outside. Every one of them has a story about your father. Teaching them how to ride. How to stay clean. How to be men when it mattered. We never forgot him. We just hid him. Marlene reached for the photograph at last, tracing the edge with trembling fingers. All my life, she said, I thought he'd made a mistake. Marcus shook his head. He made a choice. The words settled into her bones. She opened the envelope then, slowly. Inside was not just paper, but intention. Proof. Restitution waiting to be explained. But even before she understood what it held, the truth itself felt like payment enough. Outside, the street remained still. 97 men waited, heads bowed, giving space to something sacred. Marlene pressed the photograph to her chest and cried, deep, shaking sobs that carried decades of grief and relief at once. Marcus didn't interrupt. He stood with her in the silence, letting the truth do what it needed to do. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red but steady. They lied, she said. Yes, Marcus replied. And today we stop. If you believe truth should never be buried, subscribe. Lies thrive in silence. The envelope felt heavier now that Marlene knew what it represented. She opened it carefully, as if rushing might fracture whatever fragile piece had settled into the room. Inside was a check made out in her name, the amount written clearly, deliberately, without flourish. The number stunned her, not because it felt unreal, but because it felt overdue. 35 years of silence condensed into ink and paper. Marlene shook her head. I can't take this, she said, the words automatic, reflexive. I didn't help you for money. Marcus met her gaze without flinching. We know, he said. That's why you get it. He told her how the money had been gathered. 97 men, each one contributing the same amount, no exceptions. No speeches. No arguments. A debt agreed upon the moment her father's name was spoken the night before. What they had taken by lying, they would now return by telling the truth. But the money was only the beginning. Marcus unfolded the documents beneath the check, spreading them across the counter. Deeds. Titles. Records long buried under bad bookkeeping and deliberate neglect. Property her father had purchased decades earlier, held in trust, forgotten when the lie replaced the truth. Land that had quietly remained in her name all these years without her ever knowing. You already owned it, Marcus said. We just never had the courage to tell you. Marlene stared at the papers, stunned. Her father hadn't just left her memories. He had left her something living. Something meant to grow. Outside, word spread quickly. The kneeling men rose slowly, one by one, not in celebration, but in acknowledgement. Neighbors stepped closer. Phones lowered. Fear gave way to understanding, and understanding softened into something warmer. One woman crossed the street, then another. Someone brought water. Someone else asked quietly if everything was all right now. Marlene stepped to the door, the photograph still in her hand. She held it up so they could see his face. Not as an explanation. As an introduction. This is my father, she said simply. No one interrupted. He fixed things, she continued. Not just shoes. People. When they were broken. Heads nodded. Recognition passed through the crowd like a shared breath. What followed wasn't applause. It was participation. A neighbor offered to help renovate the shop. Someone else volunteered professional skills. Another spoke about needing work, about wanting to learn. The line between outsider and community blurred and dissolved. Marcus stood back and watched it happen, a small tired smile touching his face. This is what he wanted, he said quietly. Not money. Not praise. Continuation. Marlene felt the shift inside herself then. The weight she'd been carrying for years loosened its grip. In its place rose something steadier. Purpose. She thought of her daughter upstairs, of the inhaler she could now replace without counting doses, of the shop that no longer felt like a shrinking space, but a foundation. Of the father she could finally remember without doubt. The lie had taken everything. The truth gave it back with interest. As the street slowly returned to motion, Marlene remained at the center of it, no longer invisible, no longer alone. The legacy that had been hidden from her was no longer a burden to carry, but a path to walk. She hung her father's photograph in a new place, where it could be seen clearly. Not as a relic of loss, but as a reminder of what was possible when someone chose to run toward the fire instead of away from it. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It never does. But it began there in that moment, surrounded by people who had once been strangers and were now something closer to family. Marlene closed her eyes and breathed deeply. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like work worth doing. If you stand with people who fix what's broken instead of walking away, comment, "I choose kindness." Some people will watch this story and say it's about bikers. Others will say it's about money. A few will say it's too good to be true. But the people who really understood it know better. This story was never about 97 motorcycles filling a street. It was about one woman who could barely breathe under the weight of her own life, choosing to help anyway. It was about a father who ran into fire when every instinct said run away. And a daughter who fixed what was broken because that's what she was taught love looks like. The lie tried to erase him. Time tried to bury him. But kindness has a way of refusing to stay quiet. Every single person watching this right now knows what it feels like to be one bad month away from losing everything. To feel invisible. To do the right thing and wonder if it even matters anymore. Marlene didn't know 97 men would come back for her. She didn't help because she expected a reward. She helped because she refused to become someone who only survives by walking past pain. And that's the part that matters. Because the truth is, most people won't ever face 97 bikers in the street. But every one of us will face a moment where helping costs us something. Time, money, pride, safety, comfort. And in that moment, the world quietly asks who you're going to be. If this story moved you, it's because some part of you already knows the answer. So if you believe kindness isn't weakness, if you believe truth deserves daylight, if you believe broken things, and broken people, are worth fixing, subscribe. Not because this channel tells stories, but because these stories remind us who we're supposed to be. Comment below and tell me one person you're going to help, even if no one ever finds out. And share this with someone who's forgotten that dignity still exists in this world. Because lies survive in silence. But kindness spreads when ordinary people decide it's worth the cost. And sometimes, it only takes one choice to change everything.